Picture this. A locked bedroom door on the third floor of a crumbling brick house overlooking the docks, and a woman's voice on the other side saying the one word her father never wanted to hear. No. Walter Langford stood in the hallway with the key still warm in his fist. 68, silver at the temples. The man who once sealed freighter contracts with a handshake and a cigar. Tonight his voice cracked like cheap plywood. Signed a quitclaim, Elena, or there's no path left. I am not asking. She hit the door once with the heel of her hand. I'm not signing the yard away to wipe your ledgers clean. Find another way. Now, you have to understand something right then. The company they were selling the yard to never showed mercy in public. People called the man Brighton. They said the last owner who signed his papers lost everything before the season turned. They said he settled arguments with a lean and a smile that never reached his eyes. And Walter Langford had already taken the courtesy check talk. For days. That was the clock. But here's the part nobody in that hallway knew. The woman they had just pressured had already met the man who would stand watch over her fight. She just did not know it yet. And weeks from that night, every person who called her worthless would watch her walk past them having beaten the auction cold on her own terms. What kind of man tips 2 fingers from 71 Ford and keeps count in the dark? That is the question that is going to cost some people everything. Let me take you back 11 days, because that is where the real story starts. Call it day minus 11 if it helps you keep the hours straight. Elena Langford was 64, 5'4", dark hair, usually twisted up with a pencil so it stayed out of the paperbacks she shelved at harbor-bound books. She had her mother's quiet mouth and her father's stubborn jaw. She lived in the attic room of the family house because the mortgage was already eating itself alive. Mother long gone, the place felt like a stage where she had overstayed. She did not go to clubs. She did not wear dresses that caught light. But the night after Walter first mentioned an arrangement, she needed air that did not smell like old bills. Harbor Lights sat 3 blocks off the container piers, all red velvet and low jazz. A bookstore friend pressed a free pass into her hand and vanished into the crowd. Elena ordered club soda, found a dark booth, and tried to disappear. That is when the first idiot showed up. Mid-30s, gold chain thick as a finger, breath already sour with whiskey. How much for the rest of the night, sugar? She stood. You've got the wrong girl. He grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave a bracelet of white pain. You're hanging around a place like this dressed like that. Quit playing virgin and get in the car. She yanked. He held. Then a second shadow moved in from the stage lights. The man wore a black cowboy hat tipped low, a battered leather vest over bare chest, boots that had seen actual work. Tall enough that the first idiot had to look up. When he spoke, the voice was pure gravel and calm. Let go of her or lose the hand. Your choice. 3 seconds. The gold chain man laughed once. The cowboy did not. Something in the way he shifted his weight made the air change. Gold chain let go. His buddy tried to swing. The cowboy caught the wrist, twisted, and the buddy was suddenly on his knees making a sound like a stepped-on cat. No big slogans. No wasted motion. Just done. Then the cowboy looked at Elena. Really looked. You all right? She managed to nod. Thank you. He walked her out the side door into the cool salt air. His truck was an old 71 Ford the color of wet asphalt. He opened the passenger door like it was 1955. Name's Cole, he said once they were rolling. You don't have to give me yours. Elena. Elena. First time at Harbor Lights. Last time, I think. He almost smiled. I danced there 3 nights a week. Pays the bills. Tonight was not the usual crowd. She watched the dock cranes slide past the window. You do that for every girl who gets grabbed? Nope. You're the first. They stopped 2 blocks from the Langford house because she asked him to. She did not want questions at the gate. Before she climbed out, he reached into the vest pocket and pressed something into her palm. A silver medallion no bigger than a quarter, shaped like a diving hawk, edges worn smooth. You ever find yourself in trouble you can't walk away from, he said, you hold that up where a camera can see it, or you leave it somewhere I'll notice. I'll come. No questions. What? Because for the first time along, while I saw somebody who still looked surprised that the world could be ugly. Don't lose that. And don't lose the hawk. She closed her fingers around the cool metal. Will I see you again? Count on it. She watched the truck's taillights until they turned the corner. For the first time in days, her chest did not feel like it was full of wet sand. She slipped the medallion onto the thin chain she already wore, her mother's old locket chain, and tucked it under her blouse. She had no idea the man who just saved her was already deciding whether to keep watch over her father's desperate fight. Day -10 arrived with the smell of burnt coffee and lemon oil that no longer covered the rot. You ever walk into a house that used to mean something and feel the years peeling off the walls? That was the Langford place that morning. Old Walter Langford stood at the kitchen counter in the same gray cardigan he'd worn since Elena's mother passed, stirring coffee that had boiled down to tar. 68 years old. Hands that once could lay a keel true to a 1/16 of an inch now shook just holding the spoon. Elena came down the back stairs, still wearing last night's blouse, the hawk medallion warm against her collarbone under the fabric. She didn't mention Cole, didn't mention the man at Harbor Lights, or the way the silver had felt like a promise. Some things you keep in your pocket till the right wind blows. Bank called again. Walter said without turning, voice flat as yesterday's tide. They're sending a man at 10. Name's Brighton, from a city office. Wants the ledgers. Now, you have to understand something about those ledgers. Walter Langford's boat works had floated half the working fleet on this stretch of coast for 41 years. 41. Every fishing skipper from here to the breakwater knew the stamp on a Langford hull meant it would come home. But the big marina conglomerate, Meridian Yachts, all glass offices and polished deck shoes, had been circling for 18 months. They'd already bought the 2 yards on either side. Walter's place was the last thumb in their eye. What would you do if the thing you built with your own back was about to get boxed up and sold for scrap value? Because Walter just kept stirring. 10 o'clock came with the click of expensive heels on the porch boards. Jeffrey Brighton, 34, navy blazer with a Meridian crest stitched in gold thread, cologne that cost more than Walter's weekly grocery run. He didn't wipe his feet, just walked straight into the kitchen like he already owned the linoleum. Mr. Langford, bright smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes. We can do this the easy way. Sign the quit claim, take the courtesy check, $42,000, and walk away with your dignity. Or we open every drawer and I start counting what you still owe the suppliers. He set a slim leather folder on the table. Your choice. Clock's running. Auction on the 15th, either way. Elena felt the medallion press against her skin when she stepped forward. Those ledgers are complete. Every dime. My father doesn't owe. Brighton looked at her the way you'd look at a porch chair somebody left in the rain. And you are. His daughter. The one who used to, what was it, teach piano? Cool. But this isn't a recital, sweetheart. Grown-ups are talking. He flipped the folder open. Invoice copies, red stamps, numbers that made Walter's shoulders fold inward. Signed by noon, or the locksmith comes Thursday. Your call. Walter's pen scratched once across the paper, then stopped. Elena saw the tremor in his fingers, and something hot and quiet rose in her throat. Here's the part nobody in that kitchen knew yet, including Jeffrey Brighton in his crest-stitch blazer. Elena reached past her father, not for the pen, but for the old wall phone. Rotary still, because Walter never trusted the new ones. She dialed a number she hadn't spoken aloud in 11 years. 3 rings. A woman's crisp voice on the other end. Records division. Elena gave a file number. 447 Langford Delta. Clear and steady. Asked for the certified copy of the Coastal Easement Survey from 1987. The one that still controlled water access for any commercial yard on this spit of land. Asked them to messenger it to the house before 11:30. Then she hung up, turned back to Brighton, and smiled the smallest smile you've ever seen. You might want to hold off on that locksmith, she said, until you've read what actually runs under the slip. My father's name isn't the only one on the ground rights. and 42,000 wouldn't by the pilings. Brighton's cologne suddenly smelled thin. He closed the folder a little too carefully. I'll verify that. You do that. Now, picture this. A woman most folks still remembered as the quiet girl who used to play hymns on Sundays, walking into a cinder block building that smelled of wet rope and burnt coffee. The clerk behind the counter, name badge said Darnell, early 20s, earbuds still in, barely looked up. Yard permits are online, he said, or you could try the kiosk. Elena set both palms flat on the Formica. I need the current status of Commercial Mooring Certificate 19C for Langford Marine, and the open work order log for the North Bulkhead, going back to '03. I got the earbuds out. Darnell blinked. Ma'am, that's restricted to registered operators or legal. Or original bondholders, she finished, voice mild as tea. Check the file. The bond number starts 8831. You'll find a signature that matches the easement survey that arrived at my house yesterday at 11:17. Certified copy. Blue ribbon. Still warm. He checked. You should have seen his face change when the old bonding schedule came up on that chunky monitor. Elena didn't crow. She just waited while the printer wheezed out 3 pages. One of them listed a maintenance lien that Brighton's people had quietly filed 48 hours earlier, trying to jump the line on any salvage claim. Classic move. The kind of thing you only spot if you've spent years watching men in nice jackets try to paper over water rights. She took the sheets, thanked Darnell by name, and walked back out into the drizzle. Small reversal? Sure. The lien would take 10 more days to perfect if nobody challenged it. Elena had just started the clock the other direction. But here's the mini crisis that dropped on top of it before she even reached the truck. A white panel van sat cocked across the gate when she got home. 2 men in matching windbreakers already wrestling the big bronze prop off its cradle. The one Walter had rebuilt by hand the winter after Mom passed. Walter stood on the porch in his house shoes, shouting something the wind ate. One of the men held a clipboard like a shield. Order from Brighton Holdings, the taller one said when Elena stepped into the grit. Equipment inventory pending forfeiture. Sign here or we load it. Walter's hands were shaking again. Elena saw the tremor travel all the way to his shoulders. She didn't raise her voice, just walked up, looked at the clipboard, and pointed to a line the men had probably never noticed. That prop's listed under personal residual, not commercial inventory. See the asterisk? See the handwritten note from '96? That's my mother's. She paid the machine shop out of the piano money so it wouldn't count against the yard's debt. You haul it, you're converting. And conversion, she said, soft as the hawk under her blouse, gets expensive once the easement holders start talking. They looked at each other, looked at Walter, looked at the old man who suddenly seemed taller because his daughter was standing in front of him. The prop stayed. Van left with nothing but tire tracks and a promise to run it up the chain. Walter waited until the gate stopped rattling. Then he said, quiet, Ellie, that note. You wrote half those residual lists with her. After the first stroke. I thought you'd forgotten. She hadn't. She just hadn't said. Not yet. Day -9. 9 days until Brighton's auction clock hit 0. The hawk lay flat and steady against her skin while she helped her father back inside. Outside, a '71 Ford the color of wet asphalt idled half a block down. Engine low, 2 fingers lifting once off the wheel. Cole was still counting. And Jeffrey Brighton? By supper, he'd know the prop was off limits and the lien had company. What he didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was that the woman he still thought of as a piano teacher had one more file number he'd never seen on any crest-stitch folder. Not yet. Not tonight. But the debt? The debt had started adding interest. And that supper came sooner than Jeffrey expected. Day -9 still had hours of light left when a second van rolled up. Not the inventory crew this time. Clean white, no logo on the side, just a Brighton crest small enough to miss unless you were looking for it. 2 people stepped out carrying leather portfolios that still smelled like the showroom. The woman wore a watch that cost more than Walter's truck. The man had Jeffrey's jaw and Jeffrey's habit of looking past people instead of at them. His son, Marcus Brighton, 34, Harvard Law cufflinks catching the late sun, and a smile that never quite reached the eyes. "We're here to clarify a clerical issue," Marcus said, all polish. He didn't wait for an invitation, just crossed the gravel like he already owned the sound it made under his shoes. "The residual designation your daughter cited appears irregular. We'll need original documentation by close of business tomorrow, or the prop reverts to the auction schedule." Simple enough. Walter started to answer. Elena put a hand on his arm. Light, steady. The hawk sat warm under the collar of her work shirt. "Now, you have to understand something about the way Marcus stood there." He looked at Elena the way men look at a piano teacher who's wandered into the wrong meeting. Kind, patient, completely finished with her before she opened her mouth. "And you are?" he asked. "The person who knows where the 1996 shop ledgers live," she said. "You'll want volume 3. Bottom shelf, left of the furnace. There's a coffee stain on the spine shaped like Oregon." Marcus blinked. Just once. The woman with the expensive watch actually wrote that down. Here's the part that still gets me. Elena didn't fetch the ledger herself. She sent Walter. Let her father walk those 40 feet with his own legs and his own pride while she stayed in the yard with the Brightons and the cooling engine ticks of their expensive white van. When Dad came back, she opened the book to a page she'd marked 28 years earlier with a florist receipt from Mom's last birthday. And right there, blue ballpoint, her mother's hand, and her own mixed together, was the residual schedule. Serial numbers. Dates. The prop's inheritance trail written so clear a child could follow it. Marcus's jaw did a little work. This doesn't satisfy the current filing standard. It satisfies the easement recorded at the county in '94, Elena said. Soft again. Same tone she'd used on the inventory man. And the easement runs with the land, not with Brighton's convenience. You can check docket 318B if you like. I've got the book and page if your counsel forgot his shoes this morning. What would you have done, standing there with a man half your age talking about clerical issues like your life was a typo? Because Elena just waited. Let the silence do the heavy lifting. Somewhere down the block, that asphalt Ford idled again. Cole keeping count the way he always had. Marcus closed his portfolio a little too carefully. We'll be back with proper instruments. You do that, Elena said. Bring Jeffrey himself next time. Save the postage. They left tire tracks cleaner than the first cruise. Walter let out a breath he'd been holding since lunch. His hands had steadied some. Not all the way. Enough. That night the mini-crisis arrived on paper. Day -8 started at 6:12 a.m. with a certified letter slapped against the screen door hard enough to wake the neighbor's dog. Walter found it in his slippers. Elena found him at the kitchen table with the envelope already open and his coffee gone cold. Notice of accelerated default. New demand. Brighton Holdings casting the residual fight as evidence of obscured assets and citing that as cause to freeze the yard's operating account pending the auction. $71,400. Every dollar Elena had scraped together for diesel, parts, and the 2 part-timers who still showed when the checks cleared. Frozen by 9 a.m. if they didn't wire a good faith deposit of $18,000 by close of business. $18,000 they did not have in cash. Walter's voice went thin. Ellie, the boys need paying Friday. The fuel. I know. She sat down across from him, took the hawk pendant out from under her shirt, and set it on the table between the sugar bowl and the letter, the way Mom used to set down her thimble when a conversation needed weight. Little brass bird, wings spread, a scratch on the left alone from a toolbox drop in '03. Walter stared at it. Remembered. You still wear that, he said. Every day they try to take something. She didn't tell him yet what the file number on the reverse side of that hawk meant. Who had stamped it? What office? Not yet. Instead, she pulled the rotary phone. Yes, they still had one, black and heavy as a purpose, across the table and dialed a number she hadn't used in 11 years. 3 rings. A woman answered with a voice like gravel, and old loyalty. Margot, it's Elena Langford. I need a 48-hour bridge on a hold. No, not the piano money. The other account, the one under the residual trust. Yes, use the authorization from the 91 indenture. You'll find my counter's signature on Rider 7. A pause on the line. Then Margot saying, quiet, knew you'd call before the auction clock. Tell Walter his girl still keeps better books than half the county. By noon, the freeze had a crack in it. Not open, not free, but cracked. Enough that Friday's payroll could clear if nobody blinked wrong. Elena hung up, pressed the hawk flat to her sternum again until the metal took her heat. Outside, dust lifted on a dry wind. Somewhere Jeffrey Brighton was learning that piano teacher had just moved $18,000 he thought he'd pinned to the board. And Marcus? Marcus was probably polishing a new smile for tomorrow. Day -8 still had an afternoon in it. And the debt, once it starts adding interest, doesn't sleep. And you might have thought that was the end of the afternoon's trouble. You would have been wrong. By 1:30, the phone rang again. The wall phone this time. The one with the curled cord that still smelled faintly of the old telephone table oil. Walter answered. His face changed the way it changes when it takes a nail. He held the receiver out to her without a word. County Extension Office. A young man named Harlan Rees, voice still cracking on the hard consonants, informing Ms. Langford that a stop work order had just been posted on the East Cropland. Soil samples, he said. Irregularities cited by a private consultant hired that morning. Until the lab cleared them, 72 hours minimum. No harvest equipment could cross the property line. The consultant's letterhead? Brighton Agricultural Advisors. Jeffrey's second cousin's firm, the one that used letterpress stationery and charged by the indifferent shrug. Elena listened with the hawk pendant warm against her palm. She didn't raise her voice. She thanked young Mr. Rees for the courtesy of phone call instead of a padlock, hung up, and looked at Walter. They're trying to starve the payroll sideways, she said. If the beans don't move, the buyers walk. If the buyers walk, the note balloons. Walter's hands opened and closed once. Can we fight it? Not in 72 hours. But we can move the beans before the ink dries. Now picture this. 2 o'clock, white sun. The north field still open because the order only named the east. Elena pulled on the denim jacket with the torn cuff and the old Union pin still winking on the collar. Local 417, grain handlers, her father's. She didn't take the pickup. She took the 78 flatbed that still answered to a key on a leather strap. Walter rode shotgun with a thermos. The hawk rode under her shirt like a second heartbeat. They had 6 hours of light and 12 hired hands who still remembered what her word was worth. She paid them in cash when the cracked freeze Margot had opened. Crisp hundreds in an envelope marked only with the residual trust stamp, the one that still carried an embossed hawk smaller than a thumbnail. One of the older men, blue-eyed Joe with the bad knee, turned the envelope over, saw that mark, and looked at her a long second. "Ma'am," he said, quiet so the younger ones wouldn't catch it. "My daddy used to say a Langford never stamped paper light." That true. Elena only smiled. "Load the beans, Joe. We'll talk history when the grain's under roof." By 4:15, the flatbed had made 3 trips to the co-op elevator on Route 9. The one run by Bernice Hale, who still kept her father's ledger in a locked bottom drawer and who had never liked Jeffrey Brighton's shirts. Bernice weighed every load herself. She didn't ask questions when Elena signed the tickets with a middle initial nobody in town had heard her use since the funeral. E.M. Langford. But Bernice's eyebrows climbed half an inch, and she filed the carbons in the special folder she saved for names that still carried weight in the county archives. Small reversal, see? The stop work order stood. The east field stayed locked. But 11,000 bushels of clean soybeans were already ticketed and drying under co-op roof by the time the sun dropped red behind the silo. Enough to cover Friday's wages and the first fuel draw. Not salvation, just oxygen. They rolled back in the yard at dusk with dust in their teeth and the flatbed groaning. Marcus's silver coupe was parked crooked under the catalpa tree. engine still ticking. He leaned on the hood in a cashmere sweater the color of wet sand, phone to his ear, laughing at something Jeffrey must have said. When he saw them, he ended the call and gave that polished half-wave, the one that always looked like it came with a price tag. Ellie, Walter, heard there was a little regulator hiccup. Shame. If you'd come to the family office this morning, I could have smoothed it. Still can. One signature and the consultant retracts. Elena climbed down slow. The hawk pendant swung free for half a second when her jacket caught on the door handle. Just long enough for the late light to catch the scratch on the left alone and the tiny stamp number on the reverse that Marcus had never bothered to read. She tucked it away, walked past him to the porch steps. Tell your consultant the East Field will wait, she said. The North already moved. Marcus's smile flickered. First crack she'd seen in it all week. He recovered fast, of course. Men like him practice recovery the way other men practice their good side for photographs. But she saw it. Walter saw it too. Inside, she set the last elevator ticket on the kitchen table beside the sugar bowl. Ticket number 2904C. Net weight 3,812 bushels. Grade 1. Under the lamp, the paper smelled of dust and victory the size of a match head. Day -8 was almost gone. Outside the catalpa, leaves clicked like poker chips. Somewhere Jeffrey Brighton was learning that a stop-work order doesn't stop a woman who still knows which gate the night watchman leaves unlocked. And the hawk, warm again against her skin, kept its secret about the office that had issued its number and the year, and the reason a piano teacher from a dusty county road could still move money and grain and loyalty like pieces on a board only 3 living people remembered how to play. 19 hours to the next wire deadline. The debt was awake, and so was she. 19 hours. That's what the kitchen clock said if you tallied it honest. 19 hours until the wire that would either clear the north elevator or leave 3,000 bushels of grade 1 sitting in a bin Jeffrey Brighton's man had already tried a padlock. Elena poured Walter the last of the chicory coffee. Neither of them spoke until the cup was half gone. You ever notice how quiet a room gets when 2 people who've been family 39 years decide the next move without saying it out loud? That's what settled over those oilcloth chairs. She touched the hawk once, quick, the way a woman checks a watch she doesn't need to look at. Warm. Always warm now. Then she reached for the rotary phone on the wall. Same black Bakelite that had hung there since Carter was in office, and dialed a number she hadn't used in 11 years. 3 rings. A voice like gravel under snow. Yard. Tell the night crew the sample bags from bin 4 go out on the 614. Not the local. The through freight. A pause. Then, ma'am, that routing's retired. Not if the seal still reads Meridian Cooperative, Form 7. Hold the stamp box under the second drawer. You'll find it. Another pause, longer. Somewhere in the background, a diesel idled low. Yes, ma'am. She hung up. Walter watched the receiver settle into its cradle like it weighed more than plastic. You just rerouted a train, he said, not quite a question. I reminded a man where the stamp box lives. Day -7 began with the sound of tires on gravel that didn't belong to Marcus's coupe. Elena was already in the barn loft when the county AG inspector's truck rolled up at 6:03 a.m., headlights still on against the gray. Young fellow, clipboard, boots, so knew the soles still squeaked. Name tag, Red Kyle Brennan, Department of Weights and Measures. He had the earnest face of somebody who'd passed every test and never once been lied to by paperwork. Marcus must have called him before sunrise. That was the mini crisis, laid right on the doorstep like a courtesy basket of trouble. Brennan climbed the loft ladder careful, flashlights sweeping the dust motes. Ma'am, I got a formal complaint. Alleged misgrading on elevator tickets issued under Stop Work Order 441. I'm going to need to pull random samples and reseal. Elena didn't argue. She just handed him the wooden sampling probe her father had turned on a lathe in 1958. The grain of the ash was worn smooth exactly where a hand belonged. Bin 4, she said. You'll want the northwest corner. Moisture reads 13.2. Moisture always hides in the Northwest. He blinked. Most folks his age needed the digital probe and an app. He took the old ash stick like it might bite him, then climbed down into the bin while she waited at the hatch. You could hear the probe bite grain. Soft rain sound. Then his voice, muffled. "How'd you know about the Northwest corner?" She didn't answer. Just watched the hawk pendant catch the first real light as she leaned on the rail. The scratch on the left talon looked deeper in that angle, like a signature written in metal. 20 minutes later, Brennan climbed back up with 3 paper bags sealed in red tape. His clipboard had a fresh, damp circle where sweat had gotten under the clip. "Everything grades out," he said, almost apologetic. "I'll note the order appears contested, but I'll still have to file." Elena took the ash probe back, wiped it once on her sleeve, and set it in its nail on the wall. "File what you need, Mr. Brennan. Just leave the night crew alone. They're running a through freight at 6:14. He frowned. "There's no through freight scheduled on this spur." She smiled the small smile of a piano teacher who used a grade harder test than his. "There is now." By the time Brennan's truck disappeared down County Road 9, the east sky had gone the color of old brass. Walter met her at the bottom of the loft ladder with 2 boiled eggs wrapped in wax paper and the elevator ticket still folded in his shirt pocket. 2904C, now joined by a second slip the night crew, had left under the sugar bowl like a calling card. Ticket 2907. Hey. Net 2,104 bushels. Same grade. Same dust smell of small victories stacking up. Marcus called at 7:40. Speakerphone on the porch rail, so both of them could hear the polished crack around the edges. "Ellie, the inspector just left my attorney a very confused voicemail. You're making this messier than it has to be. One signature. Jeffrey's ready to reinstate the original valuation if you simply tell Jeffrey the through freight doesn't need his permission," she said. "And neither do I." Silence stretched long enough for a red-winged blackbird to finish its whole song in the catalpa. Then Marcus, quieter, "You always did keep secrets better than the rest of us." She touched the hawk again, felt the tiny stamped number press in her thumb like a brand that had waited decades to be read by the right eyes. "Some secrets," she told him, "are just collar stays holding a shirt you outgrew." She hung up before he could answer. 8 hours left until the wire. The bins were sealed honest. The train would take what it came for. And somewhere between the loft dust and the chicory, still cooling in the pot, the debt had collected another quiet installment. Paid in front of a young inspector who would remember, years from now, that an old woman with a wooden probe had known exactly where the moisture hid. The hawk stayed warm against her skin, and day -7 still had light left in it. And you would have thought the day was done, wouldn't you? Bins sealed, tickets in a pocket, Brennan gone. But day -7 wasn't finished taking its bite. Around 4:30, Walter was out by the old fuel tank, checking the diesel level when the white sedan rolled in slow, tires whispering on the gravel like it didn't want to announce itself. County plates, gilt lettering on the door. Not the state inspector this time. Local. A young woman stepped out in a pressed gray blazer that still had the pinholes from the store tags, clipboard under one arm, the smell of new vinyl seats riding the breeze with her. "Mrs. Langford? I'm Dennis Klein, Township Agricultural Compliance. We've received a complaint regarding unauthorized rail activity and possible grade misrepresentation." She held the clipboard like a shield. "I'm required to place a temporary hold on any outbound moving through this siding until a full recount is completed. Effective immediately." Walter's hand tightened on the fuel tank ladder. Ellie felt the hawk under her collar, small, warm, that stamped number digging a quiet L into her thumb. 8 hours to the wire before this. Now maybe none. Picture the sound of that clipboard snapping open. Plastic and paper and certainty. Ellie didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. "Who filed the complaint, Miss Klein?" Denise hesitated half a second too long. But the paperwork is in order. Form 41B. Hold is live until our office clears it. Could be 48 hours. 48 hours. Which put them past the wire, past the through freight, past everything Marcus and Jeffrey wanted. Clean, legal, public enough to leave a bruise. What'd you have done? Because Ellie just nodded once. The way a woman nods when she's already 3 moves ahead of the person still reading the rules. Then we'll recount, she said. Right now. You, me, Walter, and the official probe. Not the stainless ones they issue out of the Capitol. This one. She pulled the old wooden probe from the loft rail where it lived. Dark hickory, worn smooth by 1,000 trips in a grain, nicked near the handle that looked almost like a crescent moon if the light hit it right. And we'll do it by the 1978 Midwest Silo Standard, Section 4. Not the abbreviated version they teach now. Denise blinked. Ma'am, I'm not sure You will, Ellie said, and there was no meanness in it. Just the solid weight of somebody who had once written half those sections in pencil on legal pads before the ink dried in any handbook. She didn't say that out loud. Not yet, but she let the method leak. The way she counted the depths. The way she rotated the bins opposite the usual sequence, so the fines settled where a newer inspector would never think to look. The way she made Denise write the moisture readings herself at 18-inch intervals, 17, 34, 51, until the young woman's pen slowed and her mouth went a little soft around the edges. By the time the sun had slid behind the catalpa, the whole paper had a new line on it in Denise's own handwriting. No discrepancy found. Gray confirmed. Hold lifted 6:07 p.m. Denise stood by her car with the clipboard against her chest like it had gotten heavier. Mrs. Langford, that probe technique. My grandfather used to talk about a woman who ran the old regional lab out of Peoria. Said she could smell a 2% soft spot through 3 feet of corn. They called her. Plenty of women worked those labs, Ellie said gently. She touched the hawk again, felt that tiny stamped number answer her. Drive safe, Miss Klein. And next time somebody phones an anonymous, ask them which bin they claim is wet. Liars always forget the number. Denise left with more questions than she brought, and that was fine. Questions travel. They nest in the right ears. Walter handed Ellie a glass of water that tasted like the well, iron and cold. Through freight still on for 6:14 tomorrow. Still on. He patted his shirt pocket. Tickets 2904. C and 2907. It made a quiet paper sound. Marcus is going to hear about this before supper. Good, Ellie said. Let him chew on it. They ate leftover cornbread on the porch steps, while the evening cool came down smelling of cut hay and the far diesel of somebody else's tractor. Day -7 burned itself out in gold and indigo. Ellie sat with the hawk against her collarbone and counted the hours the way other people count rosary beads. Day -6 started before the birds. At 4:52 a.m., the kitchen phone rang. Old rotary still squat on the wall because Ellie never saw a reason to chase every new thing. Walter answered on the third spin. Listened, held the receiver out. Jeffrey's voice, smooth as furniture polish at that hour. Eleanor. Delightful as yesterday's theatrics were, the elevator cooperative has flagged your 2 tickets. They're refusing to cut the final checks until an independent lab installs monitoring sensors in both bins. My firm retained the lab last night as a courtesy. Technicians arrive at 9. You can cooperate, or you can watch the grain sit until it spoils and the lien reverts. Your choice. Signature still cures all of this by noon. Ellie looked at the chicory pot, at Walter's tired eyes, at the hawk's neat stamped digits catching the stove light. Tell your lab to bring their own coffee, she said, and tell them Section 12 of the old Peoria Protocol requires dual calibration against a reference sample drawn before sunrise. We'll have it ready. She hung up soft. Walter raised an eyebrow. Do we have a reference sample drawn before sunrise? Ellie smiled, that small piano teacher smile again, the one that used to send boys back to the metronome until their wrists ached honest. We will by 5:30. And out they went into the blue dark, probe in hand, hawk warm. Day -6 already collecting its first quiet dew, while somewhere in nicer kitchen Marcus was probably learning that an old woman with callous thumbs still knew exactly which rules were younger than she was. By 5:17, the bins sat black against the sky, still deciding whether to turn pink. Walter held the flashlight low so it wouldn't wash out the numbers. Ellie climbed the ladder slow, left foot, right foot, pause at the third rung where the weld always caught a boot. You ever notice how the body keeps a map of a place long after the mind stops checking? Hers did. Probe went in at the east vent, 32 inches down, the depth the old Peoria sheets still called sacred even if the glossy new manuals forgot it. 3 pulls. 3 glass vials labeled in grease pencil. Reference 6A, 6B, 6C. The hawk tapped once against her sternum when she leaned, those stamped digits cool as wet iron. Back at the house, the chicory had gone bitter in the pot. They left it. By 8:40, the lab van rolled up, white Toyota with a magnetic door sign that said Crestmont Analytics, and underneath, in smaller print, a division of Harwick & Sons. 2 kids in navy polos climbed out. One carried a Pelican case that looked heavier than both of them put together. The other had a tablet already lit and a smile that said he'd practiced being the polite one. "Mrs. Langford? I'm Denny. This is Jake. We'll need access to both ticketed bins and your reference pulls if you got him." Ellie pointed at the cooler on the porch rail. "Sunrise draws. Dual path. You'll calibrate against these before you hang a single sensor." Jake glanced at Denny. Denny's smile thinned a hair. "Our charter specifies manufacturer standards. 0.4 variance, ISO 712. We're square. Your charter's younger than my second mortgage," Ellie said, mild as weather. Section 12 still lives in the cooperative bylaws. Dual calibration or the tickets stay locked. You'll find a wording on page 41 of the 1987 binder under the counter at the scale house. Dusty, but it votes. Now, you have to understand something about kids with tablets. Most of them never met a rule that wasn't already loaded on a screen. Denny tried calling Jeffrey. Straight to voicemail. Tried Marcus's direct line. Same. You could almost hear the air leak out of him. Mini crisis landed at 9:16. Jake cracked the Pelican and lifted out 2 silver cylinders the size of thermos bottles. Pretty things, packaged like jewelry. He went to mount the first one on bin 2904C, and the gasket crumbled in his fingers. Not tore, crumbled, dry as last year's corn husk. The second cylinder did the same dance. Both seals shot. Shelf expired 6 months prior according to the lot stamp Jake finally squinted at. Jeffrey's courtesy lab had sent Christmas leftovers. Denny won the color of skim milk. We can run without primary seals for interim data. Firmware compensates. Ellie just looked at him. Not mean, just long. The way a piano teacher looks at a boy who skips scales. Interim data doesn't cut final checks, she said. And firmware doesn't replace rubber that turned to chalk. You hang cracked sensors. The cooperative flags the whole take as compromised. Grain sits. Rien wakes up hungry. But the plan your boss sold you at whatever hour he dialed. Walter, quiet till then, cleared his throat. There's a Napa 3 miles east that still keeps bulk neoprene for the old harvest monitors. Sam behind the counter knows the durometer rating by heart. You boys got cash or company plastic? Denny swallowed, looked at the ruined gaskets, looked at the cooler with Ellie's 3 neat vials, looked at the hawk under Ellie's collar, those digits catching a stray bar of morning light like a badge that had outlived its uniform. Company plastic, he said. They were gone 27 minutes. 27 minutes, Ellie used to walk the scale house binder out into the sun and dog-ear page 41, so hard no tablet could pretend it hadn't been read. When the van rolled back, Sam's parts bag rattled in the passenger footwell, and Jake's hands smelled like solvent. Calibration took another hour. Dual path, the way she called it. Crestmont's pretty cylinders against her 517 samples. First run matched within 0.11. Second run tighter. Jake muttered something that might have been respect if you stretched it. Denny typed the sign off with 2 fingers like the keys might bite. At 11:04, both sensors hung true. Green lights. Tickets 2904, C, and 2907. A blinked hold cleared pending final audit at auction day. Jeffrey's noon deadline for Ellie's signature slid past like a train that forgot to stop. Denny lingered by the van, tablet hugged to his chest. Mrs. Langford, those Peoria sheets. My uncle used to talk about an inspector who wrote half the moisture tables they still bootleg out of Peoria. Woman name of Drive safe, Ellie said. Not sharp, just finished. The hawk settled warm again. And tell Jeffrey the next courtesy can stay in its box. They watched the white Toyota kick dust east toward the highway. Walter poured what was left of the chicory over the porch rose just to hear it hiss. Somewhere a radio in the shop played a station that still believed in steel guitars. Day -6 still had 11 hours of daylight, and whatever fresh paper cut Marcus and Jeffrey would invent before supper. Ellie touched the hawk once. Thumb over the stamped digits the way another woman might touch a wedding band, and went to check the rain gauge even though no cloud had threatened since Tuesday. Because the debt doesn't collect itself, does it? And tonight, if the pattern held, somebody was going to learn that expired gaskets weren't the only thing past its prime in that fancy firm. Day -6 ran long enough to sunburn a man's neck if he stood still watching the lane. Walter shook the chicory pot empty and wiped his palms on his work jeans. They're going to try paper next, he said. Machines showed them up. Paper's cheaper. Ellie didn't answer. She already had the old binder open at page 41 again. The dog ears soft as a pocket seam. The hawk's chain ticked once against her collarbone when she bent. That little metal bird had traveled farther than most of the trucks that used her scale. She still packed the weight of every hot afternoon it had witnessed. At 2:40, the fax machine in the shop coughed awake. That machine hadn't drawn power since Walter's last physical. Paper crawled out smelling of dust and toner. A single sheet. Crestmont letterhead thick enough to shame a wedding invitation. Jeffrey's name signed in blue ink that looked wet even when it wasn't. Notice of temporary suspension of third-party calibration privileges, pending review of chain of custody irregularities dated. The date was yesterday's rainfall that never happened. Fancy way of saying they still wanted her signature and would freeze the hold-cleared tickets if she didn't play. Tickets 2904, C, and 2907. They sat blinking green on Denny's tablet somewhere east of town, but ink on Crestmont paper could turn that light red before supper. Walter read it twice. They can't do that. They just did, Ellie said, till somebody who still remembers how the tables were written makes them sorry they tried. You ever watch a woman, 64 years old, fold a threat notice into a perfect square and tuck it behind a coffee tin like it was a grocery coupon? That's what Ellie did. No raised voice. No slammed door. Just the hawk lifting once when she straightened, those stamped digits catching the shop window light. Mini-crisis landed at 3:30. Marcus himself rolled up in a black crew cab that still had dealership mats in the footwells. Polish boots. Watch that cost more than Walter's first tractor. He didn't get out fully, just stood in the open door like the gravel might scratch his cuffs. Mrs. Langford, we can settle this quick. Signed a waiver acknowledging Crestmont's dual-path methodology as primary. Your little porch samples become supplemental. Tickets stay green. Everybody keeps their dignity. Dignity. The word landed soft and mean. Ellie stepped onto the porch boards that still held the chicory wet. I kept my dignity through 4 droughts and 2 board changes, son. I'm not trading it for your methodology. Marcus smiled the way men smile when they think age is a handicap. With respect, the auction committee listens to current credentials, not folklore from Peoria. He said folklore the way some folks say rust. There was again, the name of the old lab town hanging in the air like chaff. Ellie let it hang. She did not reach for the hawk, did not correct him. She only said, come inside the scale house. Bring your pretty boots. What would you have done? because she could have run him off with Walter's shotgun look alone. Instead, she walked him past the rain gauge, past the binders still open, and set both palms flat on the steel deck of the platform scale. The same deck that had weighed every grain ticket out of that county since Carter was president. "Stand there," she told him. Marcus laughed once, short. Then the laugh died, because Ellie Langford pulled a yellowed card from behind the binder's back cover. Thicker stock than Cressmont's threat letter, edges soft from decades of thumbs. A Peoria Central Laboratory certification, original issue, inspector number stamped in the same font as the digits under her collar. The card didn't say her nickname. It said Eleanor M. Langford, master moisture metrologist, author of Protocol Table Series 7 through 12. Date of issue older than Marcus by a decade and change. She didn't hand it to him. She set it on the scale beside his left boot and dropped a single number 6 hex nut on the platform for weight. The digital readout flickered, settled. 0 error inside the tolerance that Cressmont's own cylinders had matched that morning within 0.11. "Your dual path runs on my tables," Ellie said. Quiet, almost kind. Every firmware update since 91 still bootlegs the dry-down curves I wrote when your daddy was learning long division. You freeze my tickets, you freeze your own calibration pedigree. Auction day committee can read a provenance chain same as I can. Marcus's throat moved. He looked at the card, looked at the hawk chain just visible at her collar, looked at Walter leaning in the doorway with a coffee mug that had never known a dishwasher. "I need to make a call," Marcus said. "Make it from the road," Ellie answered. "Fax paper curls if you leave it in the sun. Same as excuses." He left the threat notice on the scale. She let it sit there beside the oil-stained nut until the crew cab dust settled back onto the lane. Then she slid Eleanor M. Langford back behind the binder cover where the tape still held after all these years. The hawk settled against her skin again, warm as a pulse. Walter whistled low. "That's day 1 of them finding out. Day -6, Ellie corrected. She tore Jeffrey's suspension notice into strips and fed them to the porch rows like mulch. 5 days and a wake-up till the auction barn fills. Plenty of daylight left for the next cut. And somewhere east, a black truck was already dialing a number that would not like the answer it got. The steel guitars kept playing in the shop. The rain gauge stayed empty. Ellie touched the hawk once more, thumb writing those old digits, and started copying page 41 by hand on a clean paper in case the binder itself became the next thing they tried to call irregular. Because the collection doesn't pause for courtesy, does it? And the men in nice boots had just learned that folklore still knows how to weight a scale. And then auction day arrived. The barn packed wall to wall with the same polished boots that had laughed her off the lot. You could smell the coffee and the hay dust and the nervous money. Cressmont's tables sat center stage under the lights, serial numbers shining, dual path firmware humming like it owned the century. Marcus stood up front in a fresh Oxford, Jeffrey at his elbow, both of them counting bids before the gavel even moved. Ellie walked in last. No fanfare, just a binder under one arm and that hawk chain catching the barn light once. Walter held the side door. She set the old card on the auctioneer's block, smooth as setting a level. "Item 0, she said, voice carrying without shout. "Provenance chain for every calibration curve these units still run. Eleanor M. Langford, original tables, unbroken. Anyone want to bid on hardware that goes dark without the lady who wrote its bones?" Silence hit like a dropped wrench. Phones came out. Lawyers went pale. One old rancher in the third row started clapping slow. Then the sound caught and rolled. Marcus's face did that collapse you only see once, pride folding in on itself. He stepped down off the platform while the room watched, met her at the rail, and said quiet enough for just the two of them, "I was wrong, Ellie. About the antique, about the tickets, about every damn year I treated you like leftover inventory. I'm sorry." She nodded once. That was the private debt paid. Then he turned, Mike still live, and told the whole barn the same thing, louder, no polish left. Jeffrey followed, voice cracking on her name. The binder stayed open on the block. The hawk stayed warm against her throat. Highest bid of the day withdrew itself rather than touch iron that belonged to her tables. 6 months on, the shop still smells like solvent and rain that never quite comes. Walter's mug has a twin now. Ellie keeps page 41 framed above the scale, salt air freckling the glass. Grown kids stop by Sundays. One of them finally asked about the chain and got the whole quiet story. Marcus sends a Christmas card every year with a single sentence inside. Still learning the dry down. She pins them behind the binder tape. What it comes down to is this. A life spent true doesn't need a spotlight to stay sharp. It just needs one clean moment when the weight lands honest, in front of everybody who said it never would. And when that moment arrives, the scale doesn't lie for anybody.